In the year of 2025, Eintracht Frankfurt sold their two best strikers, Omar Marmoush and Hugo Ekitike, for a grand total of €180 million. Once again showing a masterclass in how to get maximum value from their players. But how did they get so good at selling? To provide context, it's worth noting that at the turn of the century, Frankfurt were not very good. In the 90s, they came close to winning the Bundesliga once, but famously threw it away on the final day. And during that same period, they had the likes of JJ Okocha and Tony Yeboah pass through. Didn't really win a lot. Their golden era was more in the 70s and 80s, with the likes of Jürgen Grabakowski and Bernd Holzenbeiner. And in the 2000s and the early stages of the 10s, Frankfurt struggled and then they were relegated. In 2012, they returned to the Bundesliga, but then in 2016, they nearly got relegated again, but if it were for not the hiring of former defender Niko Kovac. The hiring of the German Croatian was a turning point for Die Adler. A year later, Frankfurt would reach the DFB Pokal final, losing to Borussia Dortmund. However, a year after that, they would reach the final once again, and this time beat Bayern Munich in what was really like a defensive masterclass in how to counter. And during Kovac's time at Frankfurt, he laid down the foundations for a lethal front three that became known as the Magic Triangle or the Three Buffaloes due to like their size, speed and strength. And that was Sebastian Haller, Luka Jovic and Ante Rebic. But it was under Kovac's predecessor where they would flourish. After the Pokal win, Kovac would depart and join Bayern Munich, and he would be replaced by Adi Hütter, who had made his name for himself in Austria within the Red Bull system. Under Hütter, Frankfurt didn't really do a lot spectacular in the league, but in the Europa League, they would start to develop this special relationship with Europe's second competition. They would go on a run in 2018-19, but fell short as they lost in the semi-finals to eventual winners Chelsea. But for this front three that had been a key part in their progress to the semi-finals, it would be the end for them. But it would be the beginning of a new era for Frankfurt. Jovic would be their biggest sale yet as he moved to Real Madrid for €63 million. Haller would move to West Ham for €50 million, while Rebic would head to AC Milan on loan before later making that move permanent. All three failed at the next clubs, with Jovic being a spectacular fail and one of Real Madrid's most recent flops, while Haller also flopped at West Ham before moving to Ajax and returning to Germany, and then returning to the Netherlands again, while Jovic and Rebic are both drifting around Italy. The departure of the front three meant Frankfurt struggled in the next season. They brought in Andre Silva initially on loan from Milan, struggled in his first season. But the season after, they were able to qualify for the Europa League once again, led by the goals of Andre Silva. However, at the end of that season, Hütter would then depart for what was at the time a record fee for a head coach in Germany, which is €7.5 million. And he would be replaced by Oliver Glasner, who had actually led Wolfsburg in the same season to the Champions League. So during this period, there was like the flourishing of a new set of players for Frankfurt. Daichi Kamada, Jesper Lindström, Djibril Sow, Evan Ndicka and Filip Kostic then all became household names in Frankfurt. Well, as I said, Andre Silva was brought in, he scored a lot, and then he ended up moving to Leipzig, where he ultimately flopped. You're beginning to see a bit of a trend here. Hütter led the groundwork, and then his compatriot Glasner delivered. Despite what was atrocious league form, in hindsight, it was irrelevant, as the Austrian led Frankfurt to the 2022 Europa League final, which was after a cup run that saw them beat Barcelona and West Ham. Now, Frankfurt had pedigree in this competition as they won the trophy in 1980, but that showed that like the drought that they'd gone over 40 years. And then Frankfurt would go on to win the final against Rangers on penalties, immediately sending Glasner into a different level as a head coach, which we've now seen subsequently with what he's done with Crystal Palace as well. In the summer, Frankfurt would then, because they can now they qualified for the Champions League, they were able to attract a new level of players. And so they signed Vander Kolo-Muani on a free transfer from Ligue 1 side Nantes. However, that season Diatta did struggle taking that next step as they struggled to balance the Champions League and the league, but they were able to make the DFB Pokal final, where they ended up losing to Leipzig. And this would be the end of the road for this edition of Frankfurt, as Glasner would leave in the summer due to disagreements with the board. Glasner wasn't the only one to leave, as that summer Lindström joined Napoli, Kostic joined Juventus, Kamada moved to Napoli, Evan Ndicka left on a free to Roma, Giboso moved to Sevilla, and so basically they lost like the core of this team that had won them the Europa League, while the biggest sale would actually be Kolo-Muani, who after only one season, where admittedly he kind of exploded as a striker, he was sold to PSG for 95 million euros, which would be Frankfurt's record sale. And it was another statement sale from them, showing that, okay, they are like the Jovic and Haller sales weren't one-offs. And so in Kolo-Muani's place, Omar Marmoush arrived on a free transfer from Wolfsburg, who had been like an average Bundesliga player at Wolfsburg and while on loan at Stuttgart. And then Frankfurt began to show their capability when it came to scouting as they raided the Belgian market for William Pacho, who joined from Antwerp. And then they also finally were able to get another replacement for Kolo-Muani in the winter when they completed the loan signing of Hugo Ekitike, who was out of favour at PSG due to the likes of Messi, Neymar, Mbappe and Kolo-Muani ahead of him in the pecking order. That season saw Frankfurt qualify for the Europa League once again, but no one really stood out. Like Ekitike struggled with fitness due to the immense lack of football he played in the first half of that season, while Marmoush was average. The summer of 2024 saw Frankfurt sell Pacho to PSG for 40 million, but it was the attack where things began to flourish. Both Marmoush and Ekitike exploded in terms of their output and became one of the most exciting duos in world football, and this began to attract interest from abroad. The standout of the two was Marmoush. During his first 6 months with Frankfurt in that season, he ended with 28 goal contributions in 20 games. He was on a ridiculous run and was the only player to keep up with Harry Kane in terms of goal scoring. And it was as if he was scoring or assisting in every single game. And then Frankfurt held firm. They were like, we're not going to sell him for this set amount. And the team stepped up and paid it when the Egyptian would join Manchester City in the January transfer window for 75 million euros. This then left Ekitike to lead the attack, which the Frenchman did successfully, ending the season with 22 goals and 12 assists in 48 games, whilst also significantly underperforming his XG, which means he could have scored even more. This led Frankfurt to qualify for the Champions League as they finished fourth, and this was the first time Frankfurt had qualified for the Champions League due to their league positioning. However, Ekitike would be the next to leave Frankfurt in the summer, and he would follow Marmoush to the Premier League. Initially, it looked like he was going to move to Newcastle, but then Liverpool stepped in and paid the 95 million euros for the Frenchman. And so far, he's hit the ground running, and even earned himself a call-up to the French national team, which he was unable to do with his form at Frankfurt. After Ekitike's sale, the cycle will begin again. Can Uzun has already been Frankfurt's standout player of the season so far. Then you've got the likes of Hugo Larsson, the midfielder, who looks set to be Frankfurt's, who could be their next big sale. Then there's the likes of Jean Bahoya, Faris Chaibi, even Jonathan Burkhardt, who has been a Bundesliga striker for quite a while, but he's so far integrated into this exciting Frankfurt side. Now you have the context. Here is how Frankfurt got so good at selling. And the answer is Marcus Krösche. It's worth noting that the sales of Jovic, Haller and Rebic, and it happened under his predecessor Freddy Bobic, but Krösche is where things really hit a new level. The 45-year-old was previously sporting director of RB Leipzig, and he worked with Ralf Rangnick all over before he moved to Frankfurt. And then since his arrival, he's been known to drive a hard bargain, and he basically always gets the fee that Frankfurt wants. But most importantly, what makes Frankfurt's way of working so successful is there's a clear succession system in place. You can see it with Vander Kolo-Muani. when they sold him, they brought in Marmoush and Ekitike. With Ekitike's sale, they brought in Jonathan Burkhardt. With Marmoush's sale, they acted and brought in Eddie Awahi and Michi Batshuayi. Wahi is yet to actually score for Frankfurt. So Frankfurt are always prepared for departures. They either have a replacement lined up due to the club's smart scouting, or they're already at the club and settling in. I mean, Chanuzun struggled last season because he was behind Marmoush and Ekitike. But as soon as the two of them have left, he was able to have that settling in period before then stepping up into the starting 11, and he's immediately been a hit. The same with Jean Bahoya as well. He kind of struggled in his first season and a half at Frankfurt, but in this season he's already matched his goal output from the previous 18 months beforehand. So under Krösche, Frankfurt have placed themselves as one of the best teams for young players to go to before being sold to a bigger club. Frankfurt became so good at it, Borussia Dortmund can no longer keep up. And Leipzig, it's no longer Dortmund that are the best at this, with the likes of Ousmane Dembele, whatever. It's now Frankfurt and Leipzig. If Ousmane Dembele was breaking through now and he wanted to move to Germany, he would more likely move to Frankfurt than to Dortmund, which is quite telling. And Frankfurt are happy with this. I mean, Krösche himself calls these clubs that they sell to end clubs. And that's the likes of Liverpool, PSG, Manchester City. And he's turned Frankfurt from one of the older squads in the league to the youngest. And you see it this season as well, where they regularly play with 8 or 9 players under the age of 25. And the only notable players they have at this level, or at this above 25, are Robin Koch, Rasmus Christensen, Mika Zetterer, Elias Skiri, and Mario Götze. Krösche's work has made him the most in-demand name in football when it comes to sporting directors. However, if he leaves Frankfurt, it's unknown if he will be able to replicate his success at a bigger club due to the control that he has at the Waldstadion. Like, for example, if he moved to Bayern Munich, the control and that he has is significantly reduced as he has answered to the supervisory board. Regardless, the Hanover-born sporting director has made Frankfurt into one of the most interesting and best clubs when it comes to the transfer market business. And if Frankfurt are interested in a player, it's likely only a matter of time before they explode onto the scene. However, what comes with this is, great, Frankfurt have made themselves really good at selling players. But then that just kind of takes away like what football's about, trying to win stuff. What Frankfurt have now encountered is, yes, they have one of the youngest squads in the league, but that just means they're just developing players to sell them on before they can achieve anything. The last young team that was successful was Borussia Dortmund, and that was in the early 10s, and before that it was Stuttgart. So while, of course, you want to make all the money and from buying and selling, you're just never really going to achieve anything with that unless you hit the perfect storm of Bayern Munich, most importantly, having an off-season, and you having a crop of young players who are already good enough to be performing at such a high level. And whether Frankfurt have the good young players at the moment is besides the point. They obviously do. But what this does is, the old saying, you can't win anything with kids, is kind of true. Like, yeah, you can have a large group of young players, but you need experienced ones as well. And if Frankfurt want to achieve anything, you need experience. And since the departures of like Kevin Trapp in the summer, the experience at a high level is lacking. The only player who's played at a high level is Mario Götze. The others are experienced, but they don't possess the type of experience that you need to maybe win stuff. I mean, Elias Skiri has spent most of his time at Cologne. Robin Koch was at Leeds and Freiburg. Mika Zetterer wasn't even number 1 at Werder Bremen until 2 seasons ago. And the same with Rasmus Christensen. So they may bring experience, but they don't bring the necessary experience you need to achieve things. And you're kind of seeing this now, because it kind of affects Frankfurt's play as well. Because they're also like young and gung-ho, they basically neglect defending. And you see this. Atletico Madrid, they lost 5-1. Union Berlin, they lost 4-3. Borussia Mönchengladbach, they won 6-4, but that was because they couldn't kill the game off when they were 6-0 up. You need like experience and maturity to do that. And that's what Frankfurt don't possess at the moment. And so, like, if Frankfurt want to win anything, they need to kind of like find the right balance. In a way, like what Leverkusen did bringing in Granit Xhaka and Alejandro Grimaldo clearly benefited them, because it brought like Frankfurt kind of need to do the same thing. Like they need to find like an elder player who can still offer stuff and still offer like footballing ability, but can also like teach these younger players how to win things. I think I've said this before, but I think the likes of like if Leon Goretzka or Niklas Süle like drop down a level, if they joined Eintracht Frankfurt, I think they could raise Frankfurt to a new level. I mean, they've won stuff at Bayern. They know what it takes to win things. And in this situation, I especially think Goretzka could come in and teach these young players while still offering stuff on the pitch. And it could potentially raise Frankfurt further. Because you don't have to break the bank and do what previous Bundesliga clubs and stuff and spend so much money to potentially win stuff. You can kind of keep this model, banking on the special players that you have, but bringing in these players like Goretzka could potentially lead Frankfurt to a new level. So I think that's something that should really be considered. Like, yeah, I'm not saying invest in a bunch of 30-year-olds and get no return, but invest in people who still have some sort of who can still offer stuff on the pitch, but know what it takes to win. And if you do that, it can then take Frankfurt to a new level. Because yeah, Frankfurt is really good at selling, but then you're just a business and you kind of defeat the point of a football club. You know, what's the point for fans to get behind a player when one season later they've gone already? So yeah, let me know what you think. Do you think Frankfurt are kind of like flawed in their approach? Like the fact that they don't sell players, or they don't really, like, you need a perfect storm to win things? Or do you think you're quite happy just doing this consistently for the rest of time? Because that's what a lot of Bundesliga sides are doing now. They're just kind of going, you know what, we're never going to really challenge Bayern. Let's just adopt this model where we buy low, sell high, and maybe once in a blue moon we can win a DFB Pokal. But let me know what you think.